Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Governance Institute and Diligent webinar. Today we'll be discussing cybersecurity at board level. My name is Vesna. I'm an employee of Redback Conferencing, and I'll be a facilitator for today's session. I will now hand it over to Kate Ellis from Diligent so we can all get started.
Thanks, Vesna, and welcome everyone to Diligent's first webinar with Governance Institute of Australia. I'll be your joint host today. A little bit about me. I'm the marketing manager here at Diligent, and we've designed a series of webinar topics over the coming months to cover areas to develop your professional learning. Now, to kick off the series, we've created material to help you navigate the complexities of cybersecurity at the board level. And next session, just so that you're all aware, we'll run a live webcast scheduled for the 5th of July, and we'll be discussing how to build a stronger rapport with your chairperson. Now, our host today is Al Percival, Managing Director here of Asia Pacific. Al has over 25 years of experience in the IT industry. He's led the development of one of the largest retail solution implementations in Europe and pioneered the use of SaaS. Throughout his career, he has engaged to speak at numerous events talking about industry security issues. Now, Al has been with Diligent for over 12 years now, and during his initial engagement with us, he was head of software development and then ran our operations out of our head office in New York before returning to this side of the world. Before I hand you over to Al, I just want to cover off how we'll be handling the webinar today. We're running for a total of 45 minutes, which will consist of a 40-minute presentation with survey questions throughout and Q&A at the end, which you can ask through the chat box at the bottom left of your screen at any time. If you'd like to receive a copy of the presentation, we'll ask you for your details at the end of the call. Now, I would like to hand you over to Al.
Thank you very much, Kate, and welcome and good morning to everybody. So the topic for today's call really is cybersecurity at the board level, and we're going to be dividing this up into three key areas. Firstly, we're going to have a look at the update, have an update on the cyber threat landscape, as we call it, particularly how it affects Australia and Australian businesses and organisations. Then we've got a rather provocative question, is your board part of the problem or is it part of the solution? We're going to be having a look at how the board is interacting with cybersecurity, both on a personal individual level and also in their role as board members, and from a governance perspective, what questions might they be asking and how should they be considering cybersecurity in the context of general business risk? And then finally, we'll have a look at some practical information, some tips, and chat a little bit about where Diligent fits into this picture as well. So let's kick in and have a look just before we go in, just a tiny bit more information about Diligent. We will be providing more information at the end of the presentation. Diligent is the world's largest provider of secure board communication systems, obviously a very international company, over 120,000 users, and obviously in a significant number of organizations using Diligent, including I think some on our call today. But let's kick in and start talking about our main topic, and we've got a quote to start with. This is a quote from a member of the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, which is an organisation which was set up, as you're probably aware, about 3 years ago under the Abbott government. And the idea of the Australian Cybersecurity Centre is really to help ensure Australian networks are amongst the hardest in the world to compromise. And they're attempting to do that through a number of initiatives, awareness building, education, research, and helping the organisation generally around cybersecurity issues. And this quote really kind of summarizes what we're talking about today. You know, the cyber threat, as we all understand it, is unrelenting. It's never going to go away, and really it's a topic that not only concerns the IT team and the CIO, but really is a kind of an organization-wide issue. And particularly when you start looking at the governance and the board level, it's a topic that, of course, boards need and should be considering. And I think probably we all understand that sentiment. It's certainly been that information has been distributed by almost every organisation in the governance space in Australia today. So we're going to start off with a poll. And the question we're going to ask you to start with is just on a personal level, as to what extent do you feel that you've got some level of responsibility for cybersecurity in your organisation? And really three topics, is this something that's really just an IT issue? Is it something that, you consider but no more than anyone else? Or is it actually, if you're in the GRC space yourself, something that you really feel that you need to understand and be involved in? And I hope this isn't too much of a leading question, but obviously we're hoping, expecting a certain response from this, so we'll see whether the results actually play out. And looks like we've got pretty much most of a consensus is that I think most people, as I would hope for the people on this call, see it something that they do need to understand, something they need to be involved in, and hopefully in today's call we'll make some progress on that particular topic as well. Cool. All right, so let's move forward now, and I want to start by having a look at what's going on the federal level. And again, a slightly provocative little chart we've got going on here, just showing how much Australia is spending on cybersecurity in relation to a couple of organizations, or a couple of countries which we typically benchmark ourselves against, most notably the US and the UK. And look, and you can see immediately that Australia really is not spending that much relative to certain other countries. And again, to be fair, if you were to match Australia against a number of countries across Asia Pacific, we could probably say that Australia is certainly spending more than a number of others. But certainly against the US, and you can, to be fair, the US has got a big target on its back. It's had a lot of high-profile cyber attacks. But I think it is a good question to be asked is, should Australia be spending more? Certainly there's been an announcement of more money being spent on cybersecurity by the federal government in recent weeks, but again, I think a number of questions are being asked about whether that is enough. And this next slide is just kind of raising a couple of questions, in fact, by a think tank which is organised by the University of New South Wales, where they've done quite a lot of detailed analysis on Australian cybersecurity preparedness, and really saying, look, despite the latest government paper on the topic, which is setting out, the government's position, the spending, over the next 3 years, the general consensus seems to be that, yes, there's a lot of great concepts, a lot of great ideas being put forward, but there's not actually the money or necessarily the resources to actually back these up and make sure that Australia is going to defend itself against the ever-evolving cyber threat landscape that's out there today. So, yeah, so definitely going in the right direction, but perhaps there's a bit of a catch-up required at the federal level at least to make sure Australia is not going to be the weakest link in the chain when it comes to cybersecurity issues. So part of the paper, and this is kind of really starts to segue into what we're talking about today, is a lot of the paper that's just been released on the cybersecurity is looking at how the federal government should be working with the private sector, and really the government is looking for co-leadership from the business community to really help jumpstart this initiative. And because at the end of the day, the government can only do so much. Canberra's obviously got a lot of, and I know we've got some people from Canberra joining us in the session today. Canberra's obviously got a lot of responsibility and commitment, but at the end of the day, if we're running for private business, we can't expect the government to do our hard work for us, and so every organization needs to take responsibility for this, and part of this initiative is looking for again, that partnership. And what the paper is suggesting is starting with an annual summit between the public and the private sector, again, just to do a stock check on where we're at, where the potential threats are coming from, and making sure that both the government and the private sector are putting the necessary resources in place to meet current and future potential threats. And the other kind of part paper that's been released quite recently was also by the Cybersecurity Centre, and it was looking at just a kind of again a stock take of the current threats that are facing Australian businesses, and we're going to look at just again a little bit later on about how some of the participants may have been impacted by these. But we can see, again, top-level statistic that 50% of Australian businesses have had at least one cyber incident over the last year. And again, I suspect that's underreported. I would be suspicious that probably more than 50% have, but again, this is just obviously what the survey is reporting. And of those, if we break them down, 59% of those, that 50%, so 30%, that's included targeted malicious emails, which we normally refer to as spear phishing attacks or just generally phishing attacks. 30% through theft of mobile devices and laptops, and again, as we all become mobile workers and there's more mobile devices containing data on them, be they phones, laptops, tablets, etc., naturally that creates a potential target for someone to kind of pick these devices up and potentially breach the data that's on them. Theft or breach of confidential information, typically perhaps through some kind of, again, possibly through a malicious attack via email, but perhaps just through actually a successful breach of the organization's perimeter defenses and actually kind of manage to extract information from the network. And then unauthorized access to information from an outsider. And this covers quite a wide range of scenarios. It may just be a contractor working in the offices who has access to something they shouldn't have access to, for example, or again, some kind of accidental disclosure, perhaps through an email sent to the wrong person. Again, it's a very easy thing to do. I'm sure we've all done it, where you pick up a document, put it in the email address into Outlook, and of course Outlook will auto-complete the email for you, and then you only realize 10 seconds too late that the email's gone to the wrong person, and then of course you've got to try and recover that document or that piece of information. So we can see there's a wide range of threats that we're facing, and of course, unfortunately, these threats are getting worse, not better. So let's just have a look at some of the other reports that are coming in from the various Australian agencies who are responsible for cybersecurity at the federal level. And ACORN, which is an organization which is definitely worth keeping tabs on, just from your perspective. It's the Australian Cybercrime Reporting Network, and again, I think it's just acorn.gov.au. They do a quarterly report just with, again, a snapshot view of just how the threats are impacting Australian businesses. And they reported 9,200 reports just in the last quarter of last year alone. And there is a definite trend increasing there. But again, I'm sure that's a significant underreporting. And just to reiterate the previous slide, the email and phishing attacks are virtually always one of the top 3 attack vectors that organizations are experiencing, where emails are being sent to not necessarily the kind of the generic email where, it's just like, please enter your banking details, but targeted emails at targeted individuals asking for information or, executing what's generally called a social engineering attack, where you use information to try and get somebody to disclose information that they shouldn't be disclosing. So a couple of particular attacks which I'll just raise your attention to, again, just because you may have seen these or seen something similar to these. You've probably heard of ransomware and ransom attacks, which is where generally a malicious third party tries to hold you or your organization to ransom, perhaps by saying that they're not going to release certain compromised information, or perhaps they will release information that they've managed to extract from your network unless you pay some kind of bribe to them. And that's the most recent one. Basically, this has been highlighted by CERT Australia, and it's basically requesting for a Bitcoin ransom, or the organization will execute what is referred to as a denial of service attack, which is effectively where the organization tries to take your network down by launching thousands and thousands of internet requests to your website or your network, basically try and disable your business. So the advice from CERT is if you do receive a threat like this, is to notify them. So again, just it's info@cert.gov.au. And certainly it's quite important, if you do see these kind of attack threats, don't ignore them. Don't just kind of say, oh, look, that's probably something that's not going to impact us. It's really important that we do keep the authorities notified, because, of course, then it becomes easier to try and target the attackers and hopefully take them out. Another one, which I'll just kind of raise as well, where HR departments in particular are being targeted for employee details. And typically what's happening is the HR department is receiving an email from usually what looks like a senior executive, perhaps the CEO, asking for some information about one or more employees. And for effectively what they're trying to do here is being able to launch a significant social engineering attack against those individuals. And again, it tends to be the senior people who are being asked about. That's a common pattern, as you'll see in this presentation, because of course once you have that information, it's much easier to then, whether it's getting the answer to security questions, breaching their own personal defenses, and again stealing information and perhaps financial information as well from the specific individual. So again, make sure your HR department, or I'm sure they are, but always worth just making sure that they are aware of the potential threats that could be targeting them in particular. So, look, and I'll just briefly touch on this, and I think probably we all understand, what the threats are if something does happen and we are attacked. I mean, there's a whole range of stuff. Of course, it could be loss of revenue, if basically financial information is stolen. Of course, lots of reputational damage, and this tends to target the big companies in particular. When there is a breach, LinkedIn obviously recently, it's been bought by Microsoft, but LinkedIn obviously had a massive breach of passwords, as have a number of high-profile organizations historically, and certainly you don't want to see your name in the headlines for having a cyber attack and a cyber breach. And that also, of course, rolls down to the board members as well, is no board member wants to be associated with an organization where there's been a significant breach, and again, the company's name's been dragged through the mud for perhaps not covering the cybersecurity threat sufficiently. I think most of the rest are probably fairly straightforward and self-explanatory. And just a comment coming through. We'll make sure we pick up some of these questions at the end. But Kylie, yes, thank you for that comment. That's absolutely right. As the CEO and the CFO, there is often basically an email. We've had this actually at Diligent ourselves, funnily enough, when we had a new CEO join us just over a year ago, where the CFO received an email supposedly from the new CEO saying, "Oh, can you transfer some money?" Because in our case, it was because I want to go and travel around the different Diligent regions. And of course, it wasn't actually from our CEO at all, and that was quickly picked up and resolved. But it's quite common, particularly when you have a new executive join the organization, that you can in fact have a clever attacker use that information to launch an attacker through a phishing email and a social engineering attack. Now, just talking about how the board is getting involved in cybersecurity matters, and we've got a couple of slides just covering what the trend line is here. We can see that overall boards are starting to get a little bit more involved in cybersecurity issues. Budgets, obviously, where it comes to finances, that's typically their first point of interest, of course, looking at perhaps the overall strategy. So, I guess the bad news, if you look at this slide, is it's still less than 50% across every single category. But the good news is the trend is going the right way. We are starting to see more boards getting more involved in questions and issues around governance and cybersecurity. And just another slide just on that particular point again. Slightly different data set presentation here, but overall in this particular data set, again, it's going back a year, we were seeing, again, over 60% saying that the board is increasing their interest level in cybersecurity matters. Just over a quarter at this point, we're saying no, there's not really any real change. But before we question this anymore, let's actually ask the question yourselves, and let's start by asking the question is, do you consider, when you're thinking about your own organization, that your board has the necessary skills and knowledge to be able to effectively assess the risk from cyber attacks and gives the topic sufficient time and attention on the board agenda? Okay, so again, we're seeing quite a strong consensus here. So we'll just wait for the final results to come through, but so far the no's certainly dominating the answer here is that so far, like 85% of everyone thinks the board are not currently, either they don't have the necessary skills and they're not giving this time on the agenda. To be fair, we've got a couple of questions wrapped up in one there, but certainly looks like for the participants at least, we're not quite doing enough. So let's just do a follow-up question on that, and hopefully again we'll see some slightly more positive answers to this. Is thinking about that last question again, is do you think things are getting better or worse than they were a year ago, or about the same? Okay, so we're about 50-50. Again, I'll take the positive out of this. Well, no one's saying, one person saying worse. So we had 3% currently saying worse, and about a little bit, 44%, just under a majority, 44% saying it's better, and 50% saying about the same. So look, I think, I will take the positive out of that, is that at least half the participants do feel that things are progressing in the right way, but clearly not quite as fast as we perhaps might like. Okay, so let's just ask the question again. This is actually some research that was done last year, looking at perhaps why is the board not considering this in perhaps the way they should do, and then some interesting responses here. There's still perhaps a dominance of the board feels that this is an operational matter, that this is something that management and IT should be considering, and not really something worth raising to the attention of the board. The concerns about director liability surprise me a little bit, because you would think that from a liability point of view, directors would want to be taking some level of responsibility for this and making sure the company is fulfilling its, their board is fulfilling its duties to manage all potential risks to the organization. And I always give the analogy, when we look at why boards don't get involved and so on, I always give the analogy of the situation where, instead of thinking this is a virtual attack, where you've actually got kind of almost a physical attack against the company's premises or offices, and if you were to look out the window and you saw a bunch of guys hanging around basically the entrances to the building, trying to break through the front door, trying to find windows, and if you knew that they managed to break in, that they were going to basically ransack the organization's offices, they're going to steal financial information, they're going to basically potentially take the system down, the whole organization down for a matter of days or weeks, then we wouldn't be saying, oh, that's just a matter of the security guards. We'd be obviously making sure that the building and the organization is protected with every potential way to protect against that particular threat eventuating. But when it comes to cyber issues and it comes to virtual issues, then there's always perhaps a reluctance to engage and don't see it at the same level of threat. But in fact, it's actually greater because, of course, these things are happening continuously. Every single company is actually continuously under attack, whether you see it or not. Every one of our networks is continually being scanned for weak points. And we can be reasonably sure that sooner or later, a weak point is going to be found, and it's whether you've then got the defenses to back that up so that that weak point then doesn't result in an actual cyber breach. So just to pause with just another quote here, and again, just reiterates the point I would make at the beginning, is that really, it's the board has to take some significant ownership of this particular issue. And from a governance structure point of view, whether or not you give this to the main board, or for example, a lot of organizations typically will assign the responsibility to audit and risk, if you have an audit and risk committee, although Ernst & Young have actually suggested that for organizations where this is a significant risk, be it financial services, for example, there may be a good argument in place to actually have a independent committee which is focused on nothing except cybersecurity. And obviously that committee would have the CIO, or if you have one, the CISO, which is the Information Security Officer, Chief Information Security Officer, reporting into that committee and making sure that, again, this is being given the time and attention on the agenda that perhaps that it needs. So something to consider for your own organization. Every organization obviously has a different risk profile, and the risk and the outcome of a cyber attack will differ by organization. But certainly when you're looking at the governance structure, perhaps audit and risk or an independent committee may be the the way to tackle it. So next slide, just on who is being targeted here. This is global data, not Australian data in particular. The key message here is that there's no organisation which is immune from attack, and we do this. We give this talk in the not-for-profit community quite a lot as well. And not-for-profits, may feel they've got a very small target on their back because, what's the I guess there's not a lot of kudos necessarily from attacking a small not-for-profit regional organisation, but the reality is that not-for-profits are often the most commonly breached because they often have the weakest cyber defences. If you're in the not-for-profit sector, you may well not have the resources to be able to devote to it. You're probably relying perhaps on volunteer to manage your IT networks, volunteer resources. So it's often the not-for-profit who are most commonly attacked. Government, again, the US government, of course, has had a number of serious breaches, which is why they're spending so much money on cybersecurity. But I think we can be sure, from the statistics we've seen, pretty much every organization is potentially vulnerable to an attack. So we asked the question at the beginning, is your board part of the problem or part of the solution? So we've identified that boards, need to be taking quite a lot of ownership of the problem. I see some good questions coming in, so we'll make sure we pick these up at the end of the session. Sorry, unfortunately our labels here have got a bit messed up on the slide here, but no matter. The key message here is that senior executives and board members are often one of the most targeted attacks. So we talked about the fact that a lot of attacks these days are coming through spear phishing attacks, and we talked about the fact that some of the attacks in place, for example, targeting the HR department, are looking for information perhaps about senior executives, and that is because these are the people that hold the keys to the kingdom. They hold the keys to the castle, and of course, if I can do a successful social engineering attack or attack against a senior executive or board member, I'm going to get much richer pickings from that, perhaps both financially and also with the amount of information and the sensitivity of the information that person has access to. So why are the board and exec team vulnerable? And again, there's really kind of a couple of areas where we need to be thinking about this when it comes to the board level. I mean, obviously, as we've said, there's a lot of sensitive information being handled by the board and senior executive team that could, of course, be very damaging if it's leaked. And also, what we do see at Diligent is a lot of organizations, of course, are sending information to board members through perhaps less than secure distribution channels. And the classic ones, of course, is perhaps email or file sharing solutions, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. And of course, there is always the danger if you're sending personal information through insecure channels, then the Australian Privacy Principle 11, which covers security of personal data, there's always a possibility that something goes wrong, that there could be deemed to have been a breach of APP 11. And there are kind of obviously a number of cases which have come out where, as we saw in the earlier statistics, where we saw a lot of information being accidentally disclosed through emails and so on. So I'm going to move fairly rapidly through these, and again, you may well be familiar with some of these already. We've kind of alluded to them already. Spear phishing attacks, where we have the targeted emails that we've talked about. The dark hotel is an interesting one that you may or may not have heard of before. This is an attack vector that came up a year or so ago, and I got an update on this quite recently to confirm it's still taking place. Not so much in this country, to be fair, but certainly across Asia Pacific. And the way this works is very simple. We all know when we check into a hotel, typically if you've been on a long flight, the first thing you probably want to do is check your email and just get an update on what's happened since you've been out of contact with the office. So, of course, the first thing that happens is you log on to the hotel Wi-Fi. Now, most hotels these days, the Wi-Fi, typically you enter in your last name and the room number you're staying in, and then you get online. Now, that makes it very easy for someone to spoof that Wi-Fi network. So I can set up a little, book a hotel room where I know someone's going to be staying in the room nearby, set up a little fake Wi-Fi network, and then when the person logs on, they think they're logging on to the hotel Wi-Fi. In fact, they're logging on to my little private network, and I can then use that network to intercept the communications and steal data. So it's certainly a genuine threat. Certain countries in Asia Pacific are more vulnerable. There's been a number of reports on these. I will say that South Korea is actually one that's been reported most often for this particular attack. It's certainly worth checking, making sure that when you log into the hotel network, that you can check. When you talk to the hotel reception, they can help you make sure you are logging onto the true network and not some spoof network. So we'll start. We'll kick into our next question. And again, I will say, whoops, sorry. Just got that slide over there, is have you ever had a cyber attack such as a phishing attack against your organization employees or executives? Now this is anonymous, so we're not recording the details of this. If you put yes in, it's not going to go back at all, but I'm just curious to see whether the statistics that we see on this reflect what we're seeing from the perhaps wider data collection. In fact, wow, that's quite an amazing statistic that 88% of people saying that yes, they've had some kind of cyber attack. I'd love to be able to collect more information about that, but I think that statistic speaks for itself just in itself. Cool. All right. Thank you. So I'd like to now go into hopefully some practical advice. So we've talked about the threats. We've talked about the fact that are the board potentially part of the problem. So now we'd like to talk about how the board can be part of the solution. And there was a great question asked earlier on about how do we keep the board discussion at the strategic level rather than getting down into details. And no one wants to be talking about firewall rules and so on in a board deliberation, of course. So we've got a few principles here, and again, you'll see these when we get the slide deck distributed at the end of the presentation. And the way I can position this is kind of the board almost needs to see itself as part of the cyber defenses. Obviously, board members, as we say, can't be involved in the details necessarily of the cyber defenses, but what they can do is look at this as a risk management point of view, and also from a compliance point of view. We talked about APP 11. We talked about there are particularly if you're APRA regulated. Then, of course, there are additional implications around cybersecurity and the responsibility of the organization to manage risk. So the directors need to understand, some of the potential compliance risks facing the organization. And the third point is, and this is a really important one, is they need to have access to expertise. So effectively, if you've got a CIO or a CISO who is responsible for cybersecurity in the organization, then my suggestion would be, rather than perhaps getting whether it's a quarterly report or a 6-monthly report, is a brief presentation from the CIO to the board, just outlining, at a strategic level, how the organization is managing risk. And then we've got some questions which can then help the board ask the right questions of management to make sure that resources are being sufficiently directed in the right location. And it is, as we said earlier, this is a risk management issue. So like any risk that the organization faces, the board needs to face it, it needs to consider it as risk management. And again, it's about obviously ensuring that we've got both the plans and the resources in place to be able to manage this risk on an ongoing basis. And like any risk management, there's some risks that you may say, look, the cost of mitigating this risk is too high. So the reality is that, with some we may have to accept. And of course, there is also cyber insurance available now to help mitigate the risk as well. So you can at least transfer that risk. Again, it's very hard to insure against reputational damage, for example, but at least if there's financial loss resulting from a cyber breach, then at least there is some of that risk can be managed through insurance as well. So there are a number of questions which the board can be asking. Unfortunately, I don't have time to delve into these into huge detail, but I'll take the first 5. And I think these are great questions when you do have that presentation from the CIO coming up, in the board agenda, prepping the board with some of these questions so that they know the areas that they need to be focusing on as board members are a great place to start. And of course, the first question is, we've been looking a little bit in this presentation already, is are things getting better or worse? You know, do we see the gap between our capability and the threat, is it increasing or is it decreasing? Are we closing the gap? You know, because threats are obviously evolving, and of course, you know, we can't be static in our cyber defense strategy. So are we getting better or worse? Next question is, how are we doing relative to our peers? You know, if we you know, again, there's a lot of information sharing that is taking place around cybersecurity. Do we feel that we are doing enough compared to others in our industry, in our sector? And of course, when it comes to risk management, you know, again, are we comfortable with the decisions that management is making around security relative to the potential risk to the organization? And again, that will vary very much according to your sector and size of your organization. And of course, you know, when we do have limited resources, and this very much ties into the earlier comment about if you're not-for-profit, then how do we make sure that, you know, what resources we do have are plugging perhaps the biggest holes or the biggest threats to the organization? And, you know, classic example is your website. You know, if your website has been defaced, and this, you know, does happen, it's one of the most common cyber breaches, is that looks ugly, but it can usually be rectified quite quickly. Now, of course, you know, if you're a big high-profile organization reliant on your website, then, you know, that's obviously can be critically important, because it's going to create a very bad impression on the market if your website and your main trading platform has been breached. If it's just brochureware and it's just advertising your address and your company services, yeah, maybe not so much, and that's not going to be such a big topic for you. And again, final bullet point, you know, how are we doing again? What's our confidence level? How do we feel that we're progressing on this journey? A few more questions again, just because we're a little bit short of time, I'm just going to kind of move forward from these, and again, but hopefully nothing there that should be too surprising for anyone. So just to come back to a little bit about some of these myths around cybersecurity, particularly when we are dealing with the board, I've just got kind of 3 myths that we'll touch on, because these often come up as practical questions when we do these presentations, and it's usually around some of the tools that we're often using in the GRC space for communication. And one of the most common is that, you know, email and file sharing tools like Dropbox are great tools and actually quite appropriate for when you come to board communication, board collaboration. And from Diligent's perspective, and certainly what the research shows, is that these tools are often part of the problem, certainly not part of the solution, because the reality is once you send information through email or Dropbox or any of these typical file collaboration tools, is you kind of lost control of them. Now, Dropbox will tell you that the data is actually encrypted, but the reality is that only the file contents are encrypted, the file names are not. And as soon as someone drags the file out of Dropbox, of course, you lose all that encryption out of the system altogether. So from your point of view, if you're looking at using these tools, then always be aware that they do have potential security vulnerabilities. And PDF as well. The reality is that, you know, sending out a password-protected PDF is not a secure way to transfer information. There are a lot of tools available. Again, you can see here, you know, over 2.3 million results on Google for just the general, can I decrypt a PDF? So again, encrypted PDF, not a secure way to actually keep your data secure when you transfer it to your board members and executives. And then finally, you know, this idea, and we hear this quite a bit, is, oh, if I want to keep my data secure, I kind of need to keep it in-house. Again, research has shown that actually, we looked at those threats earlier. We saw that employees are one of the most common attack vectors, either deliberately or accidentally. Employees are the most common source of compromise, security compromise. And so third-party providers, you know, I will put Diligent's name in here, like Diligent, who focus on nothing except security, are often a better way and a more secure way to actually look after confidential data such as board papers and so on. So this just summarizes, this Paperless Spectrum slide just kind of summarizes what we're talking about here, and we're looking at the whole range of methods for transferring information, going from the hard copies, transferring data to board members from hard copies, through to obviously something like Diligence, which provides a secure board portal for keeping data secure, encrypted, and captured end-to-end throughout the board communication process and so on. So this kind of brings us more or less to the end of the presentation. I've just got one question that I'm really fascinated to learn about for everyone participating here, is how you're currently distributing papers and documents to your board today. So who's using kind of the file collaboration tools like Dropbox, who's using kind of emails, and who's still using kind of the hard copy, actually physically sending papers in hard copy form. An interesting mix coming out, so quite a few people sending PDF documents by email, a few people using kind of the file collaboration like Dropbox, and a small, that's about 25% currently using a board portal solution. I know some of those are actually using Diligent boards. Interesting, cool. All right, thank you very much everyone for that information. So just to wrap up here, so what Diligent Boards is providing for you is really end-to-end security of everything that we've been talking about today. So when it comes to securing information at the top level of the organization, Diligent Boards is really kind of providing that end-to-end solution for you, where we're keeping our data encrypted, we're making sure that the data is kept secure at all points on mobile devices. So if we do lose a mobile device, for example, we're not risking compromise of the data, and we're making sure, of course, that your board members always have end-to-end access to the information, all points in time, no matter what might be happening out there. So I think we're now at a point where we're pretty much ready to take some questions here. So we are happy to distribute the presentation. We will capture the results of this one. So if people would like a copy of the slides that we've been working through, particularly with the questions in it, we'll be happy to send those through to everyone. So thank you. Looks like pretty much everyone would like a copy. That's great. We'll make sure everyone gets a copy of the presentation. And really now, I think we've got a few questions. How are we doing for time, Kate?
We are running exactly on time, so if people are willing to stay online, we have a few questions here which we'd love everyone, obviously, to cover.
Yep.
First one we have from David. Has the use of the cloud increased the threat of attacks?
I think that very much depends on which cloud providers you select. There are a lot of people out there offering cloud solutions, and I think from the point of view of anyone selecting a cloud provider, it's about doing the due diligence on the provider, making sure that they've got obviously the security credentials. For example, there are well-known standards like ISO 27001. Any cloud provider who is offering services and claiming they're secure should be able to point to credentials like that, or regular audited and penetration testing. So there are certainly, if you use cloud providers judiciously, you can actually improve your security, because these providers, if they're doing their job well, will be putting the resources and effort in to ensure that their data, that their solution is properly secured, and at the end of the day, that's their business. But if again, there's lots of perhaps weaker providers out there that want to be avoided. And again, just by asking a few questions about their credentials and history, you should be able to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Right, thanks, Al. Second question we have is from Stacey, and her question is, how do you keep the board discussions at the strategic level rather than getting to too much into the detail?
Yeah, that was a great question, and we sort of covered some of that already. And I think it's better to have a presentation. Again, it's making sure that when the board is being presented with the data, that it's being presented with the data that's strategic and not detail. So if you have a CIO, CISO in the organization, having them come and do a brief strategic presentation, starting with the questions which we looked at in the presentation, you can definitely keep the level. And if you've got where things tend to fall down is if you've got a techie on the board who loves talking about techie, then sometimes the conversation can quickly delve into technology, but really the rest of the board will probably make sure that the conversation stays at more or less the right level.
Great, thank you, Al. Lots of questions coming through. We have another one here. Andre's asked, would you agree that the boards need to be trained in cybersecurity?
Definitely, and I think that's a great question. When you come to the board in cybersecurity, it's a journey. You cannot expect, if your board has not been dealing with this issue, that you can expect them to suddenly start, really understanding and becoming to grips with the issue straight away. So really what you start with is a gentle introduction with something like that, 15-minute presentation, perhaps, every 6 months. Then we start to build up the expertise on the board by having more regular reports, more regular detail, and again, without getting too much into the nuts and bolts and the wires of cybersecurity, but your board can certainly start by learning, educating themselves and being educated by the management around some of the questions that they should be asking. But it's a journey, and it's a journey without end, to be honest with you.
Thank you, Al. Next question is from Marina. How much does encryption lessen risks?
Massively, as long as it's well managed. Now, encryption, of course, if you encrypt your data, which is scrambling it, that does nothing to help security if the encryption key itself is not also well protected. So encryption, for example, we take something like an encrypted PDF, that's basically being protected with a password, which can be what's called brute forced. If you're using encryption very well, using strong encryption keys, and you're making sure the encryption keys are well protected, that can be make a big difference to helping security. But again, it's a huge issue. We could talk about encryption for the next hour and a half alone. Yeah. So you've got to make sure that your keys and your data are being well managed and kept separate.
Now we've run over by nearly 5 minutes already, so we are aware we've got a couple more questions here, one from Carly, another one from Marina. And another one's just come through. I think it might be best if we can hold those.
Yeah, we'll respond. For all the questions that we didn't get to, and thank you everybody for your questions, it's really appreciated. We'll get responses back to everyone with full answers to those, but that's great to see those questions come through. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Really appreciate it. I hope everyone's enjoyed the webinar today. Just so you're aware, the presentation will be also available to you all if you've requested for it. In addition, the recording will be available on our website by Friday this week, diligent.com. And if you need any further information from Al or myself, you can contact myself at kellis@diligent.com. And I believe we will be able to end the webinar. Thanks very much for joining.
Thank you.
The moderator has ended the conference. You will now be disconnected.